Thank you. It's awesome to be here. Thanks for having me back. You are in hour two of not one, not two, but 3 hours of Techstars today. Hopefully, you got a chance to hear my colleague Ryan Cooter's workshop that was right before this on doing a world-class pitch. If you didn't get to see it, I highly recommend watching it. I think it was recorded. This is recording, so presumably it is. It's really worth hearing it. He runs a master class on how to do highly well-crafted pitches. And my workshop here is sort of tailored actually to work around his. But definitely go and see Ryan's if you haven't seen it. If you don't know, we love Vancouver at Techstars. In my last cohort, we had 4 founders from 3 different companies from the Vancouver area, and I believe I met 2 of the companies here at Vancouver Startup Week, or up there at Vancouver Startup Week. Obviously, I'm not here now, down in Seattle, but we love Vancouver companies, and I sure hope that well, I know that there are a number of people who are applying, and we hope that our conversations today will lead to more. If you want to learn more about Techstars and actually hear it from people who've been through it, from our customers, hang around for the hour after this. We'll be doing an alumni panel with 3 founders from the Vancouver area who've been through both Ryan's Techstars Anywhere program and mine. I run the Techstars Seattle program. But you'll get a chance to hear what their experiences were like and what they got out of it, and you'll be able to ask them. It'll be a panel conversation, but you'll be able to ask questions directly. Much like Ryan, we are taking applications ourselves through October 11th, so you'll have a tough choice. They're both great programs, and Ryan and I and our team members, Kendra and Q, work very closely together throughout the year. You can't go wrong with a Techstars program. So why don't we jump in here? So my workshop is called Everything But the Pitch. I'll take a brief detour to talk at a high level about Techstars, because I shouldn't assume that everybody knows what Techstars is and with depth. And I'm going to give it a quick cursory overview so we can jump right into the workshop. I'd love it if this is more interactive than not. So by all means, please put questions into the chat as we go through. There'll be some time at the end as well, but I really hate just talking to a screen since I can't even see your faces today. So by all means, comments, questions, whatever you want to put in there. So all right, I'll give a quick overview of Techstars. Quickly, my name is Isaac Kato. I'm the managing director of Techstars Seattle, and I work very closely with our program manager, Q or China Titcomb, and we deliver the Techstars Seattle experience. And if you're thinking about Techstars Seattle, it's really important to get to know us. We're easily accessible. You have my email address there. And we are still taking office hours for founders who are interested in applying. I strongly recommend that when you apply to Techstars, you take some time to get to know the program staff of the programs you're interested in, because you can apply to there's six application windows a year, and you can apply to 2 programs at a time. But it's really important to get to know the people. It makes a huge, the MD and the PM make a huge difference to your experience when you're in program. Some quick words about me. I'm a serial entrepreneur, so I've started 2 companies. I've run 3. My first company was a 3D graphic software business, which I sold to a public CAD company, and it's also where it's actually happened a long time ago, but it's kind of how I wound up at Techstars, because Brad Feld, who's a well-known early-stage investor in the U.S., was one of my first angels. That we sold that company to a public CAD software company. My second company was a data center business in Iceland that I started and then ran as CFO for 10 years. And for that business, I raised $200 million in equity and debt for that company. And that company today is a big, growing, profitable data center business called Vern Global in Iceland. And then my third company I did not start. I was recruited president of a machine learning business called Mighty AI up here in Seattle. venture-backed business, and it got acquired by Uber. And then I wound up here. So in addition to my entrepreneurial pursuits, I was a VC for 10 years, most recently with General Catalyst Partners, and I've done a lot of angel investing. So I know quite a bit about early stage startups and fundraising for early stage companies. She's not here to speak for herself, but I'll just say that Q is also a serial entrepreneur. She's started and run some family-run businesses, and she's also an elite athlete. She's an elite ultimate Frisbee player. So anyway, that's us. If I were to, so Techstars, if you don't know, is one of the leading global venture accelerators. We are the global network that helps founders succeed. We run 47 programs around the world, if I were to distill our value proposition down to one single thing, ultimately it is that we dramatically increase your chances of success in your entrepreneurial pursuits. So if you think about it, most companies fail, or startup companies fail, but most startup companies that go through Techstars have success. And 84% of the well north of 2,000 companies that have gone through Techstars have either been acquired or are still going. They've raised a ton of capital, north of $10 billion, and they've built quite a bit of value. I'm not going to get into the details, but we provide that success in a few ways. The main things are, first and foremost, access to an amazing network of investors, other founders, mentors, and prospective customers and business partners. But it's an amazing global network that you have access to forever. We provide a ton of very targeted mentorship, a lot of content on and habit building on good early stage practices, and it all boils down to ultimately being a successful tech startup. And as I talk, the network is really kind of the essence of what comes to you when you come into Techstars. Quick words about Techstars Seattle. We are the third oldest program in the Techstars network. We're now entering our 12th year. I've got confused branding today. We rebranded recently. This is the original branding, and this is the new branding. I don't have the new sweatshirt yet, but I will soon. We're entering our 12th year. Techstars Seattle companies, the hallmark of Techstars Seattle company is that there has been a lot of success that has come out of our program. We've had 110 companies go through. I think it's actually close to $1.5 billion of capital raised, very high success rates, and notably 3 bona fide unicorns, Remitly, Outreach, and Zipline, are graduates of the Techstars Seattle program, and they're all valued north of $1 billion. So we've had a lot of success for our companies, and there's a long history of Vancouver companies coming through Techstars Seattle. Okay, so I'm happy to talk more about Techstars in general when we get to the Q&A, but why don't we jump into the workshop? And Phil, I see there's obviously a lot of stuff on the website, and we're pretty transparent about what we do, so you can quickly get up to speed. And of course, by all means, feel free to talk to us anytime. Okay, my workshop is entitled "Everything But the Pitch" because Ryan did a workshop on giving the pitch. So the pitch is vital to fundraising success. It is the kernel of any successful fundraising process. And if you don't have your pitch down, your odds of being able to successfully raise capital are pretty low. But that said, there's a lot of other stuff that needs to go on around the pitch. And you need to think about fundraising as a process. And you also need to think about it as a skill set that you develop. And any Techstars program you go through, you'll get a lot of help on building those muscles. Now, in a 45-minute workshop, I'm going to give you a sampling of some of the things that need to happen around the pitch, but it's by no means comprehensive. You'll get a lot. We spend really the last third of the program heavily focusing on all these kinds of things, including the pitch, but how to really become how to become an excellent fundraiser. Let's try to make this interactive, and by all means, please put your questions into the chat. I wish we could talk live, but there are, like I said, a lot of people here. So what's the first question to ask before you fundraise? So before you even get into fundraising, what should you be asking yourself? I'd love to hear what people have thought about when they try to figure out, should I go raise capital? Love some ideas here. What, you're sitting there, you're a founder, you've got this idea you're super excited about, you thinking about, well, maybe if I had some money, I could really accelerate this thing. So, okay, Ludwig said, can we do it ourselves? Yes, good one. Meaning, I think in Ludwig, you're saying, do we even need to raise money? That's a really good question. We'll talk definitely a bit about that. What will you do with the money and how will it make a difference? Absolutely. I think a lot of times I'll talk about that. People often default to just trying to go out and raise capital because they think that's something you should do, which is not necessarily the case. Do you have a viable business model? Yep. Do I need a fundraise? How do I frame my need in a way they will understand? Okay, all good questions. So my question is sort of a trick question because there are actually a bunch of things you should really ask yourself before you kick off. But a bunch of questions were asked. The first one you should really ask is, do I need the money? Right? Raising capital puts you on a path, and you need to make sure that it's the path that you want to be on. One real question is like, is my business venture scale? And a lot of great businesses are great businesses, but not necessarily venture scale. Some of the happiest people I know are founders of bootstrapped software companies that might be $5, $10, $20 million that are profitable, that have never taken any meaningful outside capital. And they have total control of their lives. They make really great living, and they don't have any, investor masters that they have to please. And so, you raise money if you think you have a big opportunity that could become venture scale. And maybe if you're not sure, you raise a little bit of money first. But once you start raising significant sums of money, you really put yourself on a path, which is either this is going to be a really big success, or basically people are going to be pretty unhappy. And, they're only actually, when you think about it, there are really only a fairly small minority of companies that are truly venture scale. And so you do need to think hard about it. It's okay to raise a little bit of money, but once you start raising significant institutional capital, you really put yourself on a path. And related to that question is, what is the best source of capital? Okay, people again often will default to, I'm going to go raise some venture capital or some seed funding, but there are other ways to raise money. Certainly friends and family, of course, but there are crowdsourcing campaigns. Sometimes you can actually raise debt if you're in business and you're profitable without giving away equity. And frankly, the best way to raise money is to get it from your customers. You always have the option to raise equity financing or venture capital down the road. But if you can get your customers to pay for the formation of your business, you will be in such a great position, because hopefully you can get profitable and then you don't have to raise money, but also you validated that you actually have a valuable product or service that customers want. And that's one of the keystones to a good fundraise. So think about it hard before you get into it. How much do I need? I have seen and have worked at, I've been part of companies that have raised too much money too early at too high a price because it was offered to them. Sometimes you actually succeed wildly and people offer you more money than you thought you were going to need. But I generally recommend that that you take the right amount of money. Now, there's certainly a dichotomy there, which is that you want to typically raise more money than you think you're going to need, but really thinking hard about how much you're going to need to get to the next set of milestones, whether it's profitability or the next round of capital, that is worth putting a lot of time and thought into. And that really question around what matters most to me, because and then this is a very personal question, but fundraising has all kinds of implication on the control of the business, on how much you ultimately wind up owning of your business. And then frankly, there's a question of like, what matters the most to you? So for some people, it's like, I don't care how much I own. I don't care whether I have control. What I really care is I've started this thing and I just want to see it succeed. But you have to think through those issues, and there is no right answer to a lot of those questions. It's really a personal question, but you do need to think about them. And Martin, you asked, how do I set my valuation if I'm pre-product or pre-revenue? Well, the truth of the matter is that you don't, in the most case, set your valuation. It's your investors who set your valuation. And so Best thing you can do is demonstrate that you're a great team going after a big opportunity, that you have some really good ideas about how you're going to do it, and then it's a negotiation. And there's just like any negotiation, there's a power dynamic and there's a supply-demand balance. There are definitely some kind of general ranges that pre-seed or seed companies will raise at, but they're pretty broad ranges. So a lot of it really comes down to how good a job you do at pitching and all the other stuff around the pitch when you go out to fundraise. All right, so those are the things to ask. And sorry, my last question is, when should I raise it? Which again, a lot of people will just default to, I'm going to go raise money because I'm starting my company. Well, you got to think hard about that, because timing, like many things in life, is everything when it comes to fundraising. You need to think hard about where the business is from an evolutionary standpoint. Are you pre-revenue? Are you pre-product? You need to think about, is what I'm doing now relevant for the time? You'll often get questions from investors like, why is now the right time for you to be doing what you're doing? And hopefully you'll have a compelling answer because something in the world changed or something in the market that you're attacking has created an opportunity for you. Timing also matters in terms of where are we in the economic cycle and how are investors broadly feeling about investing. And it can change really quickly. When COVID hit, for the first, month or two, things really slowed down as investors sat there and said, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? How's this going to impact our companies? A lot of their companies were stricken by COVID, so they were spending a lot of time. With their existing portfolios, trying to shore them up, and so funding slowed down. And then a couple months later, after things were kind of cleaned up, and they realized, well, okay, we can still do business. Actually, the pace of investing picked up quickly. So timing really matters a lot, and you need to think about that. And then lastly, one key element of timing is, are you ready? So I would say somewhere between a third and a half of the companies that come to Techstars come because they kicked off a fundraising process without being ready, and they fell flat on their faces. Not because they didn't have a good idea, not because they weren't great entrepreneurs, but simply because they didn't understand the fundraising process and they didn't have all of their ducks lined up. So they went out ill-prepared, and their timing was wrong. You don't go out to fundraise until you have everything ready to go and you've got your reps built up and you're in good shape. And that's when you go, if you're going to go. So it's really important to think about timing. Okay. So on that point, what do I need to have in place? Before I kick off my fundraising process? So, okay, you know that you need to have a pitch. You heard Ryan's workshop likely. What are questions to the audience? Again, what do you think you need to have set up before you jump into a fundraising process? What are some of the elements of a successful process that should be nailed down? You need to have your pitch, your core story lined up. I'd love to hear what other people think need to be in place. This is something we spend a lot of time on when you're in Techstars. But MVP, okay, Rodrigo put an MVP, traction, yes, MVP with traction, even better. Automation, okay. What else? Some idea of valuation. You should know how much you're going to raise and how much dilution you're willing to take. So yeah, having a guidance is certainly important. KPIs, yep. Okay, any others? Roadmap for how to use the funds, absolutely. TAM, yep. Okay, so I'll give you a high-level list of things that we generally direct our founders to have in place, and these, I think everything that I'm seeing here is either exactly this or it's a subset of one of these things. I don't have like the full detailed list up here, but you should certainly have your core pitch lined up because you've heard Ryan's workshop and you've practiced it a bunch. There are a whole bunch of supporting materials that need to be in place. Certainly your investor deck, and importantly, your investor deck is not the same thing as your pitch deck. The pitch deck might be a near perfect subset of your investor deck, but there are other things that need to go in an investor deck that you're not going to put into your demo day style pitch deck. And I think people often miss that. Your investor deck will have a sources and uses slide. So how much money am I raising and what is it going to go for? So Aman, I think you said, what are you going to use the funds for? Absolutely. You need to have a financial model which feeds into that. Financial modeling is not something that most people have done, but having at least a rudimentary grasp of it is really important because it answers so many questions about your business. It tells how much money you think you're going to need. It tells how quickly you think you can grow. It has a lot of the sort of core unit economics of your business built in. And so you need to have a financial model. Even if the revenue is, of course, a swag, which it usually is at this stage, you still need to know how much you're going to spend and where. Corroborating data. So this relates to the KPI question. This is a very dependent. This question depends very much on what you are doing, your stage. But customers are, if you say I have growth, you need to have the data that shows that you're growing month over month. If you say, hey, I think I'm starting to see product market fit, you need to have evidence of that in the form of churn data or retention data or expansion data. But any data that you can provide that will support your assertions in your pitch will help. Certainly, if you say we're going after a really big market, you better be able to very granularly and from a bottoms-up basis be able to show why, how big that market is, how many customers are there out there, and how much revenue can I generate per customer. And then even in more detail than that in many cases. But you'll need to have whatever corroborating data you can provide. You need to have your incorporation document set up. It's amazing how many fundraisings get either slowed down or in some cases they fall apart because the founders don't actually have their incorporation documents set up correctly. They don't have their cap tables done right. Investors take your capitalization table very, very seriously. It's often one of the few things that you actually have to represent and warrant to in an early stage fundraise. So make sure your cap table's clean. There's so many times when, an early founder left and you haven't cleaned up their situation. Maybe you've offered someone options that are not reflected in the cap table. It needs to be perfect. So get your cap table and your docs ready. And then if you have them, customer references will almost certainly come up as part of the due diligence process. Now, not everybody has them, so if you don't have them, you don't have them. But anything you can do to show market validation usually helps. And then lots of reps. So like I said, fundraising is a skill, and you want to build that skill up through a lot of practice. So when you come through Techstars, for example, you'll definitely do a bunch of pitch practice. And in my class, you do a lot of mock VC interviews. So again, the pitch is like super important for nailing down your core story arc. It's actually not the way that most people wind up fundraising. You rarely sit down in front of someone and talk uninterrupted for 3 to 5 minutes. It's usually much more of an iterative conversation. So when you're going through your investor deck, what I try to give you is practice on people asking you hard questions, and you get practice on how to handle those objections or those tough questions. So get in those reps, and if you come through Techstars, you'll certainly get plenty of that. And then above all else, traction. So let's see, someone nailed it in here, but traction is, Mohammed, traction is so helpful. Okay, it's not required. There are some times when someone meets you, an investor meets you and says, this person or this founding team is so amazing, and I so love the opportunity they're going after, and the way they describe their approach is so unique and interesting and differentiated, I'm just going to write a check. And that, by the way, certainly happens all the time with angel and friends and family stuff. But once you start to get into more institutional investors, there's nothing like traction to really help your chances of success. In my last class, there's a very high correlation between people who had an easy time fundraising and traction and people who had a tough time and didn't have much traction. So and traction can mean a lot of different things. Certainly revenue or bookings helps a lot, but maybe it's pilot customers. But anything you can do to show that the dogs are eating your dog food will enhance your chances of success. Okay. All right. So those are just some of the things that should be in place before you go fundraise. But if you have all this stuff lined up, you're going to be in really good shape. And then the timing is good to go, or at least one of the timing elements is good. Okay. So you've kicked off your fundraising process. I usually recommend, by the way, setting up a like formal start date that you're going to go, and actually before that you don't have a lot of deep engagement with investors. A lot of times people get into these never-ending running fundraising processes where they're just talking to drips and drabs of investors, and that's the absolute wrong way to do it. You want to start it at one time and try to move people through at the same time. I think I forgot to mention one thing. You should have your investor pipeline lined up too, and before you go, which is a group of like ideally 50 or 60 prospective investors who you think are likely to invest in you. And you want to hit them all, roughly in the same time window. You'll break them up into segments for how you approach them. And we'll talk a lot about that at Techstars, but you don't want to have it dragged out over months or even a year. But anyway, let's say you get going, you've kicked off your fundraising process, and I'll bet if any of you out there have raised, have tried to raise money before, you've had this experience. You'll go meet an investor. They'll be really friendly. They'll smile. They'll express a lot of enthusiasm about what you're doing. You walk out of the room and go, wow, that was great. I think they really liked me, and I think they're going to write me a check. And then crickets, and nothing happens. And weeks go by, and they ghost you. And that happens all the time. And so another element of fundraising is knowing really how to read the room. And sort of this comic here really captures the center. This is from the .com boom in 2000. There's this great comic called The VC, which still has a surprising amount of truth to it. But so the person on the left is the entrepreneur, and the person on the right is the VC. So the founder says, "I'm glad you're interested in my company. What's the next step?" And the VC says, "Well, I'd like to schedule another meeting." "Okay, and then what?" "Then we'll schedule another series of meetings with other partners." "How long does this go on?" "Well, we'll take a couple more meetings to keep the deal alive in case it catches fire. Eventually, things will bog down and you'll go away." "Well, what if you're really interested in investing?" "I'd just say so now." "Well, why don't you just say no now? Let's schedule a meeting to discuss that." So this, I'm curious if you just raise a hand or something in the chat, but this kind of thing happens all the time. Unfortunately, investors good investors are really good salespeople. So good salespeople will make you feel good about yourself and make you like them. That's just part of the job. But they also have this perverse incentive to not say no directly, because no investor is omniscient, and they know that they might be wrong about you. So let's say they meet you and they're not that enthusiastic about your idea, but there could be something there. So if they say no to you, you're just going to go away. You're saying, well, that person didn't like me, and you're going to go talk to somebody else. But there's always a chance that, hey, actually they're wrong, you're right, and you get a bunch of interest from other investors, and they get boxed out of the opportunity to invest in your company, which is the thing that they are really, they're really worried about. So they have this incentive to not be direct and say, actually, I don't think you're investable, or I'm not interested in what you're doing today. And that can lead to a lot of frustration and a lot of miscues. And sometimes it can cause real problems because you think, hey, I'm doing really, really well. And in fact, you're not. You're just hearing nice things from investors, but people aren't moving forward. So learning how to read the room is another thing that is an important part of this fundraising toolkit. And I'd love to hear what people think. Especially if you've raised money before, what are the signals you look for? What's a sign of that something like good is actually happening, and what's a sign that maybe things aren't going as well as you'd like them to be? I'd love to hear some ideas. And Mohammed, I see your question: is it a good idea to approach 2 or more investors at the same time? But love some input here. So what are you looking for? You've met with a handful of investors. You've gotten different signals, different behaviors, different follow-up patterns. What's an example of something that's either a good sign or a bad sign? It's really important to be able to read the tea leaves. And again, no one gets it perfectly, by the way. I've had plenty of times when I've been raising capital where I thought the meeting was a disaster, and then the next day they call back and say, I'm really interested and I'd like to set up a partners meeting. And conversely, I've had even more times where I walked out thinking, oh wow, that went really well. I nailed that. I think they're going to take the next steps, and again, they just ghost me. So, any thoughts? Well, okay. While you're thinking about that, I'll answer Mohammed's question. Is it a good idea to approach 2 or more investors at the same time? Yes, it's a very good idea. you ideally want to, I didn't talk about this earlier, you ideally want to be talking to multiple investors at the same time, and ideally a condensed window of time, so you don't have this drawn out fundraising as I was talking about. But one of the reasons is fundraising takes a lot of time and it's a distraction from running your business. So you want to try to make it as condensed a period as you can, even though you really have to budget, I don't know, typically 6 months. But you want to create a competitive dynamic. You want, ideally, a food fight where a whole bunch of investors really like you and what you're doing, and they all want to invest, because then you actually have some negotiating leverage. What you don't want to have is a case where there's only one investor who's interested, and they have all the, and they'll usually be able to figure it out, and they'll have all the power in the world to negotiate the deal and the terms that they want. So yes, you want to be talking to multiple investors at the same time, and so that you try to build up this feeding frenzy. And timing and cadence to fundraising process is really important. It's something that you can actually, exercise a good deal of control over. So it's well worth doing. All right. So what are the things what signals are you looking for when you talk to an investor? Hopefully this isn't too small, but okay. So the good signals is that if you talk to an investor and then they say, hey, I'm really interested, and then they lay out a clear and transparent process with milestones towards the next steps. Okay. So, and by the way, you're totally within your rights to say, hey, what's your process? How do you evaluate companies? What are the milestones? What are the next steps? When do you, what does it take to get to a decision? You can ask, and you can and should ask those questions of every investor you talk to. Okay. It's always a good sign if they have a thesis about your space before you arrive, and then you go along with the pitch to go, yeah, I think that's the right approach, and maybe they can even outline approaches that they've seen that don't work. But it's always good when they're familiar with what you're doing. If after the pitch they immediately jump into work and they start asking you for information, that's a good sign. If they're clearly doing work, whether it's reviewing the material you've sent, or they've said, hey, I want to talk to a customer. And by the way, you have to be careful about your references, but maybe they're talking to people they know, but they're coming back to you. That's a good sign. And then they quickly schedule up follow-up meetings with more or other senior people. So if they start introducing you to other people in the firm, that's usually a very good sign, because it means that they're trying to socialize the opportunity among their peers. And they won't typically do that if they're not quite interested in what you're doing to at least a large degree. Okay. Bad signs, like it's as simple as this. If they're not moving quickly, it's almost certainly a no. Okay. Every once in a while, things will slow down and then they'll still come through. There was actually a company in the last class. I introduced them to an investor. The investor totally went radio silent for 3 weeks. And I was like, okay, well, they're done. And then they turned out they were on vacation and didn't communicate it well. And then they came storming back and actually wound up leading the investment. But that's a very rare circumstance. Usually, if they're not moving quickly, then it's probably a no. If they know a lot about your space, but they don't respond positively, then that's a pretty good sign that you're not going to move forward. And you have to keep in mind that really good investors will, if they find an opportunity that they like, they're going to go and try to talk to every competitor playing in that space. And it's a tough balance that every founder has to measure about how much information to share and when. There are times when investors are just going to school on you, or they're at least weighing you against several other companies. And so you need to stage how much you give out. At the end of the day, you have to take some risk on this. It's just the way it goes. You're going to have to share some proprietary information to get to the finish line. But if you ever smell, you need to keep your kind of sniffers up for that. And then the dichotomy is at the same time, you don't want to come across as a complete paranoid freak. So anyway, it's a tough balance, but it's something, again, that we will help you negotiate if you go through Techstars. And then lastly, if you can't get past an associate, most firms will, or many firms will have different strata of investors, the partners. Maybe there's a middle layer of principals, and then there's associates. Associates will take up a lot of your time, and they'll talk to you, and they'll talk to you, and they'll talk to you. But if you can't eventually get to the partner, it's probably not going well. Now, there's nothing wrong with starting with an associate. People used to say, well, if you can't get a meeting with a partner, don't meet with the company. I don't really agree with that. I think there are a lot of great associates out there who will move you through. It's just that after a meeting or two, you better be going to someone more senior. There's a comment in here. Investors tend to have pre-written term sheets. They're never in my favor. How realistic is it to negotiate most of it? From FY. Well, that touches on the point that I raised before. It's 100% dependent on how much competition there is for your company. Okay, so if you have a lot of people and you've set up your process correctly, you've set up your pipeline correctly, you've done the timing right, and you have a really good idea and you have a great team and you have some traction, there's a pretty good chance that you're gonna get a bunch of people interested. And if you can have 5, 6, or 7 people, well, you have a lot of power. So if someone shows up there in that case and says, well, this is my term sheet, you can say, okay, that's great, thank you, appreciate it. That's not good enough, okay? And you can actually bootstrap your way, once you have that competition, that competitive dynamic in place, into better deals. There was a company in my last cohort that absolutely did it right, and they set up a food fight, and they got one term sheet, and they said, thank you, that's great. We'll be evaluating term sheets over the next 2 or 3 weeks. We plan to make a decision, and he gave a date. And that first investor knew that there was competition. They actually negotiated against themselves and gave him a better price. And then he wound up getting an even better deal from a different investor. And then that first investor came in as part of the syndicate. So set up that competitive dynamic, and then you don't have to take someone's pre-written term sheet. If it's only one investor, then you don't really have a lot of negotiating leverage. Your only choice is to say, no, I'll decline. So try to get a competitive dynamic set up. Rodrigo said an NDA, perhaps. Very few investors at the early stages will sign an NDA. They just won't do it. And it's not an unreasonable behavior on their part. And if you ask for an NDA, some people will perceive that as naivete on your part. You just kind of have to take a chance. And so maybe what you do is you give a high level bit of information in the first meeting, you get clarity on what their process is, and then you share a little bit more, and you share a little bit more, but all along you're sort of doing a sanity check on, hey, is this really progressing, or is this person just using me? By the way, that sort of going to school in a nefarious way, that's very much the minority. Most investors have a high degree of integrity. Confidential information coming to them is a one-way street. It's just not always the case, but a small minority don't maintain that confidentiality. But it's a chance you'll have to take if you're raising capital. And again, it's rare, but it does happen. Okay, how much do investors care about the other investors you are talking about? If you thought you needed 1 or 2, but it took 5, 8, how open should you be during that process in general? Okay, well, my very generic advice, and this is my own subjective opinion, to be clear, there are plenty of smart people who would disagree with this, is that you mention that you're having conversations with a lot of people, but you don't mention them by name. And I personally will never put 2 investors together if I can avoid it until I have the term sheet. Investors, if you think about what you're doing, if you put investors together, it invites them to collude. And they can say, hey, we both like this company, let's team up. Oh, by the way, we were the 2 who were competing against each other. Now we're on the same side, so we can keep our price down. So I generally will say, hey, I have, you make it really clear that you're having a lot of meetings, you're deep in fundraising, you're getting a lot of interest. And, there's this fine line between between like bluff, semi-bluff, and truth. I generally think it's a bad idea to completely bluff, but you need to show that there's momentum and enthusiasm. And then I wouldn't put people together, generally speaking, until you have that lead term sheet lined up. Okay. Investors asking to see code at the early stage. No, I don't think that's usually a good idea. That should be part of like confirmatory due diligence later. I would be careful about that one. I think I can't think of too many good outcomes where one of the early questions from an investor was, can I see your code? There may be some investors, I'll talk about this in a bit, who are very focused on the technology aspects of a business and will ask that kind of thing, but I'd be careful about that one. Okay, and I'd certainly ask why. Okay, By the way, keep the questions coming. I'm happy to keep on addressing them. But all right, so you've kicked off your process. You're now midway through the process, and what should you do? Well, you do your homework. Okay, you really need to. It's funny. Investors will do a ton of due diligence on founders and companies, but founders do a disappointingly little amount of due diligence on investors. And it's so important to do that. Ideally, you've actually done a lot of it before you even kick off the process when you're building up your pipeline. So you know a lot about the people you're going to go talk to. But you can only get so far in that first stage. But once you're engaged with them, it's time to do your homework. And it's really time to dig into the investor themselves, both the individual and their firm, okay? Because those are two different things. And I say that because in my mind, investors are like luggage. So unless you're some monk-like disciple of the Marie Kondo school of minimalism, you're probably like me, and you probably have a whole bunch of luggage lying around your house or in the attic or in the garage. I certainly do, and I'm not like I don't know what it is about luggage. It's just really, really hard to get rid of. We recently got rid of a piece of luggage that was at least 20 years old. But it is really, once you have an investor on your cap table, it's really hard to get rid of them. And it's frankly easier to get divorced in a lot of cases. So you really need to make sure that you like this particular piece of luggage. I happen to like my Briggs & Riley bag. That's why we kept it for 20 years. It was so good. And a great investor is amazing, and a terrible investor is really, really, really painful. So you got to do your due diligence. And the other thing is that investors are also like luggage in that they come in all shapes and sizes. A lot of times, if anyone ever says, well, investors like this or they don't like that, I'd take anything else they said with a big grain of salt, because investors are not a monolithic group. In fact, they're very, very heterogeneous. They all have different interests, different triggers, different areas of expertise, different sectoral interests, and there are certainly some generalisms or platitudes you can make about investors, but generally speaking, they're pretty different groups of people. So you really need to dig into the people you're talking to. So, what do you want to know about a prospective investor? What kind of questions do you think you should be asking the people you're talking to? And again, once you're mid-process, well, actually, I think it's always fair to ask questions of the investors. But certainly once you start to engage on a meaningful basis with them, you should be asking them questions, and you should be doing due diligence both with them and around them. But what do you want to know about a prospective investor? What would you like to know? I mean, you're talking to these people. What do I want to know about someone who's saying that they're interested in investing in my company? These are people, remember, they're not just robots or machines who write a check and go away. They are typically, early stage investors will be usually pretty engaged with your company, unless they're just truly a hands-off angel or friends and family member. So what do you want to know? How they treat other companies, for sure. Their previous investments or goals. Can they play a mentor or advisor role? Yep. I mean, I think most founders at this stage want value-added investors who can actually help them with more than just a check. A lot of, now there are some founders who said, hey, I just want you to write a check and be pretty hands-off. Smart money, yeah, that's related to that. What else do you want to know about your investors? One thing for sure is just, do you like them? You're going to spend a lot of time with investors, and if your company goes well, they'll be with you for 5, 7, 10 years. And generally speaking, you want investors whom you enjoy being with and speaking to, and when COVID's over, having dinner with or a drink with from time to time. So just plain old likability is often a factor. Now, some people don't care. Some people like edgy, rough, tough investors, and they don't care about style. But if you are one of those people, make sure you like them. So the questions you should ask, some of the questions you should ask, are they the right investors for you? You ideally want someone who knows your space, who's a good personality and chemistry match with you. You just make sure that they're right for you and they're not just investors. There are plenty of name brand great investors who might not be a good fit for you. So make sure they're right for you. It's really important to ask how they've dealt with struggling companies in the past. it's really easy to be friendly and to be a supporting investor when things are going well. But my question to an investor is, okay, what are you going to do when we hit the inevitable bumpy patch, which every startup does? How are you going to treat me? And that's something you might actually want to test by going off list and doing off list references with companies they've backed who have failed. Okay, I think one of the best references you can get is from a founder whose company failed and can still say, but you know what, that investor was totally reasonable and supportive of me all along the way. That's a great reference. Okay. I've got a bunch. I got more. I'm going to go a little quickly here, but you can see some of the other things, other questions you'd want to ask. You also need to make sure that you understand the distinction between the investing partner and the firm. Okay, and they both need to be good. The person investing is the one you have the relationship with, but let's say the firm's not in good shape, that can be a real problem if that partner leaves. So you need to take both. Robert, investors can be monsters that are out to destroy your company for their own gain. Unfortunately, that is true. Hopefully, that's the minority. I will tell you that in my 3 companies, I had great investors. And I think, frankly, if I wish I'd had my workshop before, but I got lucky. I was more lucky than good. But I had great investors, and I loved them, and some of them are my best friends today. So they're not all monsters. I know, Robert, it sounds like you might have had a bad experience, and unfortunately, some percentage of founders do. Look, one thing to be clear is that founders are investing in your company to make money. Okay, I think a good investor understands that it is really ultimately on the founder to generate success. An investor can be helpful. They can be supportive. They can make some great contacts. They can have a lot of sound experience and strategic advice. Hopefully they have some entrepreneurial experience themselves, although there are many great investors who don't. But hopefully they understand it is ultimately on the founder to generate the success. And so if you have an investor who thinks they can run your company better than you can, that's when you often will run into problems. Now, look, it's also the investor and board's job ultimately to hire and fire CEOs. Okay, and that's why you need to think about how much control you're willing to give up, because there are definitely times when a CEO or a founding CEO has hit the kind of limit on their usefulness. Very few people can scale with a company all the way through from beginning to end, and so but a good investor will have that conversation very honestly with you and won't just sort of sneak around. So anyway, lots of things to ask. So Rodrigo, I didn't. Okay, when I first started, I didn't know well enough. I just got lucky. As things went along, I got better. I think generally speaking, I got better in my career about spending a lot more time thinking about people than just about the business or the strategy, but really digging into the people that I was working with. So I wish I could claim that I was omniscient, but I'm not. Just got lucky the first time. So I guess I kind of am coming up on the end here. Okay, so look. One last thing to remember, fundraising. So a lot of people will say, hey, we got our seed round or we got our Series A. We won, hooray. Well, not really. It's amazing. It's great. Fundraising is a super important milestone on many, many entrepreneurial journeys. It's certainly a good indication that the market is validating what you're doing, and it's a real sign of success that you're heading in the right direction. But it is a means to an end. It is not the end. There are so many people who think, okay, well, now that I've raised capital, I'm done. And that's just the starting line. Now you have the dry powder to go out and invest in the things that you think will help your company grow and succeed. But it doesn't mean that you're anywhere near the finish line. The finish line is, well, it's what you decide it is, whether it's a successful exit, whether it's building a great product, whether it's really changing the lives of your customers. But the end, fundraising is not the end. It's just a means to an end. So treat it as that. Okay, it's great. It feels really, really good when you have successfully raised capital. Fun being an entrepreneur, super stressful. I remember in my first company, I was in my 20s. We were running out of money, and I started having migraine headaches every day. At 10 o'clock in the morning, I would get this severe migraine headache. And I went to the doctor and he said, well, you just have typical Silicon Valley stress headache. And then the day that we raised that angel round, it just stopped. So, but nonetheless, that was just a milestone. And for us, that first success was ultimately exiting the company.